Welcome to Spotlight. Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian has noted very good progress in Sino-Iranian talks on the expansion of bilateral relations, saying that strategic issues will be discussed during his visit to China, including the implementation of the Tehran-Beijing economic agreements. The two countries will begin implementing a 25-year mutual partnership agreement, which they signed in March last year in defiance of the U.S.'s unilateral sanctions. In another development, Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi is to visit Russia soon. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has described the upcoming visit as, quote, very significant. In tonight's Spotlight, we'll discuss Iran's look to the East policy, as the country has been experiencing decades-long hostility by the U.S., the EU, and their regional allies.
Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian has met with his Chinese counterpart in Beijing to begin implementing a 25-year strategic partnership the two countries signed last year. It is the first time Iran's foreign minister visited China under the administration of President Ebrahim Raisi, who prioritizes improving ties with the East. Upon arriving in Beijing, Amir-Abdollahian said he had had telephone calls and meetings with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi more than 7 times over the past 4 months. The visit comes at a time when Iran and the world powers, including China, have convened in Vienna in a bid to revive their 2015 agreement known as the JCPOA. The deal was supposed to remove sanctions on Iran in exchange for nuclear curbs. However, it almost unraveled after the U.S. unilaterally withdrew from the deal in 2018. The new Iranian administration has made it clear that its major policies, including neutralizing sanctions on Iran, would not be tied to the ongoing talks in Vienna. Part of the neutralization efforts is the Look to the East policy, which includes expanding relations with powers in the East, including China and Russia. Upon arriving at China, Amir-Abdollahian said strategic issues are on the agenda of his talks with Chinese officials. And prior to his visit, the Iranian foreign minister penned an article for the leading China's Global Times. He had this to say regarding the talks in Vienna. No matter what happens in the field of international relations, China and Iran, along with their trade and regional partners, will be on the right side of history forever. In another development, the Iranian president is also scheduled to visit Russia in the near future. On Friday, the Russian foreign minister described Raisi's visit to Russia as very significant. The signs of growing economic ties among the trio are already there. Members of the Chinese-Russian-led Shanghai Cooperation Organization voted unanimously last September to elevate Iran to full membership. Iran's Look to the East policy has been regarded with concern in Western media. Foreign Policy said the United States can no longer ignore the Iran-China ties, adding that additional Chinese investment will increasingly mitigate the effectiveness of Washington's sanctions on Tehran. China has already vowed to invest $400 billion in Iran's economy over a 25-year period in exchange for a steady supply of Iranian oil. Under the administration of President Ebrahim Raisi, Iran has been seeking a warming of ties with countries such as India, China, and Russia in the East, as well as its neighbors in West Asia. The foreign policy shift comes after years of nuclear talks with the West that practically had little advantage for the Islamic Republic, and decades-old U.S. and EU sanctions that had aimed to undermine Iran's independent foreign policy.
Joining us on tonight's Spotlight, we have journalist and political commentator Abbas Aslani, who's joining us from the Iranian capital, Tehran, and geopolitical analyst Patrick Welch, joining us from Boston. Let's start off with Mr. Aslani in Tehran. Please give us your views on the significance of the Iranian foreign minister's trip to China, also having in mind the escalating standoff in Southeast Asia between the U.S. and China.
Thank you for having me. In fact, the visit by Iranian foreign minister to China is preluding a visit by Iranian president to Russia in the coming days. And this indicates that Iran is shifting more toward the east in order to have more economic cooperation with the countries. The 25-year agreement with China was the focal point in the discussions between Iranian foreign minister as well as his Chinese counterpart, and they somehow announced the beginning of the implementation of the deal, which is very important. If you look at the, let's say, reaction from the West, how worried they are about this cooperation, I think this can, in some ways, indicate the significance of the relationship between Iran and China. Because in a world that we are seeing a new actors emerging and China becoming a major economic power in the world, it seems that maybe the order in the world is changing, and that's why important for other actors, including Iran, in order to have more cooperation with those new coming powers. And Iran and China, they can share some other reasons to cooperate. They have something in common, which is the pressure and the sanctions by the United States. They are the powers who oppose the, let's say, the pressures or the role or the disruptive role is played by other powers in the world. So that's why why they can find common grounds to cooperate. And the implementation of this 25-year agreement can set the ground for a new era in economic cooperation between the two countries, including on oil and gas area as well as industry and other fields as well. So this is just a beginning, and these two countries are eyeing, let's say, the lifting of the sanctions. If there is any deal in Vienna, their cooperation can increase. China in 2021, the reports say that increased its oil import from Iran and Venezuela for more than about 53% comparing to the previous year. So if this continues, it seems that the volume of trade between Tehran and Beijing can continue to increase.
Sure, let's cross over to Boston now, Mr. Welch. Let's talk about some of the pressing issues the two countries have on their agenda right now. Specifically, we can talk about economic and energy ties. As you know, a 25-year strategic agreement was signed between Iran and China last year. What would a boost in economic, energy, and trade relations between Tehran and Beijing mean? We know that a lot could be riding on those avenues.
Well, I think it's absolutely mind-blowing. It is something, it's so significant that, as my colleague there said, you'll see the West response be ever shriller and ever louder as they are threatened by increased cooperation between China, Iran, Russia, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. All of these ties are part of a global effort by all the non-Western powers to get around what is essentially a medieval siege mentality on the part of the U.S. and its own allies. It's threatening, it's destabilizing, it's dangerous, and this can be nothing but hopeful for not only the people of Iran, but for everyone who is trying to see some light at the end of the enormous long tunnel that the U.S. has built around the rest of the world.
And Mr. Aslani, Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi has an upcoming trip to Russia. The president had promised in the past a more comprehensive, quote-unquote, look to the east. The Islamic Republic seems to be moving in that very direction, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Iran president has said that his administration's foreign policy will be a balanced one. And if you look at what is happening in Vienna with the negotiations that are ongoing, it seems that Iran is pursuing lifting of the sanctions. And on the other side, as they have put in terms of, let's say, neutralizing the sanctions on the other side. Neutralizing sanctions will need, let's say, more cooperation with those countries who are opposing the unilateral and illegal sanctions of the United States. and lifting of them will require the talks that are happening in Vienna. So that's why they have decided to somehow pursue a balanced foreign policy, which is happening now. And this is something I think even if the sanctions are lifted, Iran will more benefit from the economic cooperations with the East, because the record and the past tells us the Western major companies, they will be hesitant to work with Iran. That's why I think this direction is moving toward more cooperation between Iran and the East. The projects that the East might have in future, like the Belt and Road Initiative by China, if they want to have, let's say, access to the Central Asia, or if they want to have more presence in the region, they will need to have more cooperation with Iran. And I think the region is awaiting more active role by China in the region, and we can see the role that the Russia is playing in the region. So any cooperation and coordination in the region can benefit all these countries who have something in common, and that is the hegemony of the United States that they counter against. So that's why I think Iran, for the past months that we have a new administration in office, they have tried to be in more coordination with those Eastern powers, namely China and Russia.
Mr. Welch, an analyst that we spoke to here a while back said we could actually be seeing the dawn of a new phase of unity in the Eurasian region, specifically with the appalling exit of the U.S. from Afghanistan. Do you see it in that light as well?
Absolutely. I think that is a dawning of a new age of human history on this planet. Actually, I hate to sound either so hopeful or Pollyanna-ish about it, but this is the fruit that is born of the poisonous tree that U.S. hegemony has nurtured for a century. It is high time, way beyond time, for everyone outside of the U.S.'s domination unite and push back against unreasonable sanctions, which are basically a form of war by other means, and they're murderous, and they have been incredibly difficult for the people of Iran. And the fact that this is happening is only the latest kind of page on this script. This has been happening for the last 20 years with China's enormous economic rise, and therefore its need to protect itself, its people, its investments, its partnerships, its political ties, and economic bonds with not only its direct neighbors, but neighbors all over the world. We talked about increasing oil imports from Venezuela. These are people that are under enormous pressure from the United States that has racked their economies. And China has played a uniquely positive role in bringing about some sort of a change. I think we are seeing, as I don't want to say it out loud, but we are seeing the death knell of American imperialism. It will take a while. There will be many, many more bumps along the way, but the enormous significance of these developments just cannot be overstated.
Back to Tehran, Mr. Aslani. Iran was recently granted full membership at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. How significant is an SCO membership of Iran, and what are the implications for Iran across the board economically and politically? Let's not lose sight of the fact that this development came despite the continuation of the so-called maximum pressure policy by the United States.
Well, I think this indicates that the willingness by Tehran to increase cooperation and expand ties with the Eastern powers is not just a one-sided road, but the other parties are also willing to cooperate more with Tehran, because they welcome Tehran's full membership in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, because China and Russia, as influential members of that organization, paved the way for Iran's membership in the bloc. And this was, let's say, for the first time since the Iranian Revolution, that Iran was becoming member of a security bloc in the region or in the world, and that was quite significant. And we have some reasons that between Iran, China, and Russia and other countries in the region to cooperate more. That is based on the economic maybe needs Iran or the other parties might have. But we have been hearing something under the name of triple containment by the Americans against countries in the region who are pursuing independent policies. Countries like Iran and Russia and China. This is something which we have been hearing from Americans to counter these countries who are not, let's say, obeying what the US wants to impose to other countries in the region. Cooperating in different formats and levels can be very important, like cooperation and coordination in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, economically, security-wise, and politically, or when it comes to even nuclear negotiations in Vienna. These three countries try to consult frequently together in order to somehow support each other. When it comes to other issues in the region, look what is happening in Syria, Iran, and Russia. They have been cooperating for the past years, or they had, let's say, joint military drill. A couple of years ago, and we have been hearing there might be a similar drill in the maybe near future as well. So they have tried to define new fronts or fields for more cooperation. And, as the developments or new developments are emerging in the world, including in the region, I think this is a must for all these countries. And with the, let's say, tensions we are seeing between Russia and NATO and US, or we are seeing challenges between the United States and China, or the other developments we are seeing that some new independent mechanisms or blocks or organizations are being shaped who can play a role and form developments in the region or other parts of the world independent of the will of the United States and its partners.
Mr. Welch, the Iranian president, he's called unilateral sanctions a big challenge to the world today. He says that domineering states have been using them as a tool to impose their will over others, and the sanctions are even preventing regional cooperation. Do you think that stronger bonds between the likes of Tehran, Moscow, and Beijing, they can tackle these challenges and counter the unilateral sanctions?
Well, I think they have no choice, and the outcome can only be that which you stated, to go around these sanctions through regional and cross-border cooperation. The sanctions, the idea of unilateral sanctions is a medieval one. It is meant to end run international cooperation, meant to go around the UN Security Council, meant to go around every bit of law and order that has been established since the founding of the UN. And it's the bully in the playground. And that has been so destructive to the economies of all these targeted countries around the world that it's a matter of survival. Now, the Western propaganda matrix will spin that and try to portray it as aggression, which they always do. But you can see from this period in history that these countries are just trying to survive and to thrive, and linking up with each other on all these different levels of cooperation is the only means to do that. There is no way around someone who is trying to get you and is using their economic and military might to that end. The whole concept of negotiating with the West over the sanctions and the nuclear program was doomed from the start because the U.S. is still fighting the Iranian Revolution. They have never accepted the fact that Iran is an independent country, not owned by their oil companies. And so there really isn't anywhere else to go. But elsewhere now, Iran is smart, and it's like we've heard talked about here. It's a balanced policy. They're not going to kick out the Europeans. The Europeans are going to push back against the Americans because guess what? Everyone wants to make money. Look at what is happening with Xinjiang in China, where the U.S. said anyone who does this is going to, we're going to have sanctions on them too, And okay, so the next day, McDonald's opens up in Xinjiang, and China forces Dow, I forget who it was, to strike some of the language on their website that said that they didn't do business with China in that region, and they're flexing their own muscle for survival, and that's exactly how it should be.
Mr. Hassani, I want to bring the same notion to you. What these countries, they have in common, as mentioned by President Raisi, is opposition to unilateralism. Are the U.S. sanctions and Washington's enmity actually binding more countries together?
Well, this idea was brought up months ago in Iran under the name of, let's say, the Club of Countries Against the Sanctions, meaning that the more countries are becoming sanctioned by the United States, the more, let's say, decide that they are to cooperate together in order to oppose and in order to bypass and in order to, more importantly, to make those sanctions ineffective. The United States has imposed sanctions on Iran as well as on Russia and China and other countries, Venezuela. And these countries, you can see that Iran sends shipments of, let's say, fuel to Venezuela and other parts of the world. You can see that China is importing oil from Iran. You can see that Russia and Iran are cooperating.